Hello and welcome to Gender and Youth Focus here on New Zim TV. My name is Lynette Manzini. Gender and Youth Focus is a program we bring you every Tuesday where we discuss gender and youth issues. In today's program, we concentrate on the youths. Do the youths have a role to play in poverty reduction in Zimbabwe? Is there a conducive environment for the youths to participate? To help me discuss this topic is the National Association Youth Organization Programs Manager, McDonald Munyoro. A warm welcome to you, McDonald.
Thank you very much, Lynette, for having us on the show.
To get the ball rolling, McDonald, when we talk about people failing to provide food on the table, failing to meet their basic needs, some people tend to say it's out of laziness. So can you put us up to speed and let us know what poverty is and what causes this phenomenon?
All right. So it's very good that you're saying phenomenon because it is a phenomenon. So in essence, poverty is a multi-dimensional complex phenomenon, which includes lack of access to productive resources, physical goods and services, and just like you have said, it also even includes aspects like deprivation, where one cannot feed him or herself or their family, and it even goes to encompass incomes, deprivations in terms of incomes, because for all of us, for us to support our families, our lives, we rely on some form of income or on some form of production in our lives. So in essence, when we're talking about poverty, it's citizens lacking those opportunities to access the productive resources that are in the country. If we look at poverty, most of it is found in rural areas. I think that's the common thinking out there. And you'd find that the moment a household doesn't have drought power, doesn't have cows to till the land and to help in plowing and all of that, automatically that house falls into poverty. The moment they don't have a land from which they can do any form of subsistence farming, that household falls into poverty. So in essence, it's a very complex phenomena. And if we look at our population here in Zimbabwe, most of the population are young people. They are children. If we try to look at the about 6.3 million children that are of the school-going age in Zimbabwe, we have close to 4.5 million of those living in extreme poverty. And what it means is they lack access to basic services like education, sanitation, water, health, and all these different forms of deprivation. They all come together to encompass what is called poverty.
4.5 million is a huge number, McDonald. Yeah. It's just scary to even comprehend what you're saying, that you have 4.5 million youths that might not be able to that are not sure of what they're going to eat today. It's a very sad state of affairs. So coming back to the youths, to what extent has poverty, I know you just gave us a bit of that narration of what poverty is, but to what extent have the youths been affected by poverty in Zimbabwe? You spoke about your education, you spoke about your livelihoods, but looking at our age group, the Constitution talks about 15 to 35 years. To what extent has this age group been affected by poverty?
All right, so young people in our country have been affected by poverty immensely. It is that generation where I'm sure close to 80% of them do not know what a paycheck is, do not even know how to use, the bank, access a bank account, because at the end of the day, whatever they're getting, it's not coming through formal employment. It's coming maybe through different forms of informal employment. So the mere, fact that this, population of young people is also unemployed. If we try to look at the unemployment rate in Zimbabwe, the most significant numbers fall within the bracket of young people that are between the ages of 35 and below. So in essence, our young people, they have faced the brunt of poverty head on. I'm sure when Zimbabwe attained independence in 1980. In terms of its economic, levels, production, industry, significantly the country was doing better than it is doing today. The kind of declining in economic activity, productive activity, industrial activity, etc., all of that, the young people have had to bear the brunt of that. And when you look at the young person today, he or she is disempowered economically. They are disempowered, politically, where they are discriminated and disenfranchised from holding positions when it comes to governance processes. When you look at the young person today, he or she is disempowered from accessing the productive resources within the country that can actually be able to drive economic development within the country. I think just before we came on, we were talking about, something to do with, with youth funds. Mm-hmm. Access to capital on its own for a young person to run a successful enterprise is very, very important. So you'd find that for our young people today, poverty has, really affected them in many ways. It is very difficult for a young man out there to start his own family, because culturally it means you have to go and pay lobola. How do I pay lobola without a form of income? How do I support a family without a form of income? How do I go beyond my secondary or my primary education without a form of income? How do I even create the kind of opportunities that I would want for myself and other young people in my own community when I myself do not have enough opportunities to even begin to create something? So in essence, our young people today are living very, tough and difficult lives, where it's very difficult even for a young person to have a day and, take 3 meals. For most of them, it's 1 meal or twice at most, especially if you try to look at the current context within the urban areas and also the rural areas.
Indeed, 3 meals a day are becoming a luxury in this part of the world, and which is not supposed to be
the
so.
Case, yeah.
Exactly. So, the youths are not a homogeneous group. You've got females, you've got males, you've got urban youths, you've got rural youths that you have alluded to. Are they all affected by poverty in the same way?
Poverty affects us in the same way. Remember, I said it's multidimensional, in the sense that it affects us in different ways depending on where we are and how we are supporting our own livelihoods. And I liked what you said about the urban rural dimension, because of late now, and this is according to the World Bank, urban poverty is actually rising at a faster rate than poverty in the rural areas. And I'm sure this has to do with the influx of people coming into urban areas, because they believe that there are more economic opportunities within urban areas. And especially, with the work of the COVID-19 pandemic, that has also worsened the situation and the dynamics in such a way that poverty is actually now significantly higher in urban areas. We have always heard in Zimbabwe of different food programs coming to alleviate poverty, to alleviate the lack of food in households. But I think it was only recently when we actually even heard of urban areas being considered, of regions that are not necessarily prone to poverty being considered for food distribution, which points to how COVID-19, to how even issues around climate change, the El Nino induced drought that we're currently experiencing within the country, is having a bearing and an effect on how young people can support their livelihoods. Because the moment, if I'm in agriculture and the rainy season is bad, it means my produce as a young person in agriculture is going to be low. If I'm involved in the value chain for agriculture, it also means that as a young person who's running an enterprise, my costs are going to be high, my profits are going to be low. It adversely affects the kind of turnout that comes out of my own enterprise. So coming back to your question, poverty affects all of us. It doesn't choose color, it doesn't choose gender. Of course, in certain instances, it tends to take a gender face in the sense that more women experience poverty than men. It also tends to take a child's face in the sense that when you look at our own population and our demographics, the significant numbers of people that live under poverty are actually children.
Which is another sad state of affairs. Yes. Exactly. And because when we're looking at poverty, we're not just looking at, the issue of livelihoods. We're also talking about the issue of education. How does that further, affect the youths? Because you are already you're already experiencing. You're deprived already. You're disempowered. Your family is disempowered, and then this also affects the kind of education that one has. Doesn't this then affect their mobility up or down the ladder? Because a lot of people now think that it's very difficult for the youth to go up the ladder from where they are right now, given the current circumstances.
I think one thing about Zimbabwe is, like I was saying before, the significant population is very youthful. In essence, the country is experiencing a demographic dividend, which can be used to harness economic development, to drive growth within the country. But it goes back to the environment in which these young people are growing, where they don't have opportunities for education. They want to start enterprises. They have brilliant ideas. But in terms of startup and capital, for most of them, they struggle to even start their own enterprises. And that on its own, it kills the potential in our young people that is supposed to be driving and contributing to economic development and growth, within the country. So in essence, because of the many forms of deprivation that young people are currently living under, it is very, very difficult for them to start viable enterprises which can actually be able to, rise in terms of their figures, in terms of turnover. But that does not say that we don't have young people that are even excelling under these current conditions of economic, political, deprivation. They are there, but I think for the ordinary young person there, it is actually very, very difficult for them to actually put together an enterprise that can actually survive the kind of environment that is in Zimbabwe, because again, we're also talking of hyperinflationary environment. Prices are going up every day. It is very difficult, for these young entrepreneurs to even focus and project where the country is going and also how they can respond and be able to create opportunities for all in Zimbabwe.
I'm glad that you also spoke about the successes, that are out there, that not every youth is struggling. I think you as the National Youth Association, the National Association of Youth Organizations, I hope you be able to share with us some of those stories in the future, bring in those people to the studio so that we can inspire other people, to show that it's not all all dark.
Yes.
There are success stories out there. But I just want us now to look at the issue of youths being tomorrow's leaders. We have heard it has now become a cliche. Youths are tomorrow's leaders, but some say youths are today's leaders. But then should they then sit back, fold their hands and wait for today's leaders to rescue them out of poverty? Is this what the youth should do? What do you recommend the youth to do in such circumstances?
Well, I mean, poverty is a phenomena that is not only common to Zimbabwe. Across the world, poverty takes different forms and shapes. And for the young people in Zimbabwe, they need to come together. It is our country, and the posterity of Zimbabwe lies on the potential of its young people. So the first and foremost thing as young people is that we need to be creative enough and bring the potential that we have to bringing solutions on the table to the current, economic, political, social, environmental problems that the country is currently faced with. Our numbers in terms of driving economic growth and development in the country are very good. The demographic dividend, we need to harness it as young people. And I think it's very encouraging that over the years we are seeing many hubs that are trying to incubate different ideas for young people, some in renewable energy, some in agriculture, some in technology, that are trying to harness young people that are creating solutions in such a way that some of these solutions can be scaled up. They can be the solution to the lack of electricity in a community. They can be the solution to a school that has got computers but doesn't have electricity, where through renewable forms of energy they can be able to generate electricity within that particular school. And through that broaden the horizon for young people that are accessing education in that particular school, because then it means they can be connected to the digital world. They can be part of the global village, because without that connectivity, it also becomes very, very difficult for young people to actually connect with the global world and actually be able to learn what is happening in other country contexts, and also how young people are creating solutions to everyday challenges. So I think in essence, as young people, we need to start from where we are. That seemingly problem that I have in my own space, in my own community, by creating solutions for that, as young people, we're actually proffering solutions to poverty moving forward.
So what I'm hearing from you is young people should identify the problems in their communities and monetize from there.
Yes.
Perfect. So in case you're just joining us, you are listening to Gender and Youth Focus here on New Zim TV. My name is Lynette Manzini, and I'm the host for today's program. Today we are looking at the issue of the youths, whether they have a role to play in poverty reduction. I am in the studio with the National Association of Youth Organizations Programs Manager, McDonald Munyoro. And McDonald, as we continue, a couple of years ago, I think that was in the 2000, about 8 years ago, we had our first youth fund that was unveiled. And a couple of youths, I don't want to say a couple of, but a number of youths managed to access this fund. To what extent did this loan equip the youth? Because I understand, why I'm asking this question is I understand that when these resources were extended to the youths, some failed to pay back and some did not utilize them efficiently. But to what extent did this help the youth escape poverty?
All right, so like you've rightly said, a few years back ago, we had the Ukondla Ukurera Fund, which was a fund that was designed to support young entrepreneurs in Zimbabwe that were driving enterprises in different categories, be it agriculture, be it production, be it the value, be it different forms of value chains. And in 2013, working together with Sovera House and different formations of young people, including even young people within tertiary institutions, we actually did a nationwide tour across the 10 provinces, where we are trying to look at the efficacy and also at the impact of the fund. And it's very unfortunate to say that because of rampant corruption, because of inconsistencies in terms of how implements were delivered versus when they were supposed to be delivered, you'd find that, for instance, if you look at the agricultural sector, for the young people that received the funds and did initiatives within the agricultural sector, for most of them, they collapsed. But then I think there were notable groups within the Manicaland provinces who had come together and formed sort of like consortiums where they would be given a big piece of land, they farm together. For some of those, we found them into their third phase of production. But for most of these young people, most of the enterprises, they failed to take up, because then you talk of inflation coming in, you talk of prices shifting, going up, you talk of the potential for these young people to even market their produce, because for some of them they would produce different products and services. But the issue would then become to say, how do they market what they have for the next person or for the consumer to know that a young person in Rusape is making door frames, and these door frames are going for for such and such an amount. So you'd find that for most of these young people, their enterprises, they really fail to take off. And apart from the rampant corruption that was there, where an X amount is given to young people, you go on the site, there's nothing. Or you then learn that no, the money came out, but ex-government official got involved into the distribution of the money, and next thing, the money never contributed to the enterprise that young people were driving. And I think what I was also worrying about the Ukondla Ukurera Fund was that, in as much as it was an opportunity for young people to access the much needed capital, these young people also had to pay back. Most of the young people did not pay back. And I'm sure in government trying to come up with now what you call the Empower Bank, they've tried to put, the mechanism to ensure that young people can actually pay back, where they're now choosing to work with already existing and viable, youthful enterprises. But then again, the question comes back to the amount and type of capital that is being given to young people. Because most of this capital that we're talking about, it's not as intensive as to support the startup of a youth enterprise. It might only go as far as meeting your overhead costs when you start your enterprise, but might not address the big need that you have to import a big machine that can help you to begin to brand, different advertising materials from which you can then generate income by actually selling and producing different elements and aspects.
Isn't it already problematic when the government now then decides to work with already established organizations, youth organizations? Because is it not now an issue of exclusion? Because there are youths that are already, that are already poor or disadvantaged, and they still want to climb up that ladder. And for them to climb up the ladder, you rightfully said they need to be empowered.
Yes,
but this bank is now only dealing with already existing organizations.
I think, in the current environment where we are in, where there's limited even capital that is going around, for the government, I'm sure they find themselves in a very difficult, spot where they are forced to choose, between someone who's trying to start something and someone who has got nothing going on. And it speaks to the deprivation that is even there within the environment. Because if you look at a country like South Africa, through their National Youth Development Agency, which is their version of the Zimbabwean Youth Council here in Zimbabwe, they support different entrepreneurs. Those that are starting up, those that simply have ideas, but they categorize the kind of packages and support which they give to these young people, and they create the kind of incentives that allow for these young people to go up the ladder. I remember in one of the interactions with them in the different local authorities, they actually put a quota system for tenders where a certain percentage goes towards youth enterprises that are in construction, where a certain percentage is reserved for these young people to access these tenders. If you try to look at the Zimbabwean context and scenario, do we have such mechanisms that can allow young people that are starting their enterprises to have such quotas which can help them, especially in the tough economic environment that we have, to actually be guaranteed of some form of business and revenue when it comes to them running their enterprise?
Yes, I think we would really need to, copy a few notes from next door and
Definitely we need to do that.
Empower. But, people also say that you are a product of your environment. You spoke of the issue of corruption where some youths received these funds and you would go on the site and you would not find anything on the ground. We have had a lot of corruption cases in this country. And, some people are still, walking as if, they weren't involved in any of these corrupt activities. Is this not also, part of the reason why youths are now behaving the way they behaved with the loan that was extended to them? Someone is corrupt. It's common knowledge. It's there in the papers. Nothing happens to them. Then youths get access to government fund. Are they now not becoming, products of their own environment? And what words of, what do you want to say to the youths going forward? To say when this happens, what words of advice do you want to give to these youths?
Right. So corruption in Zimbabwe is very, it's very pervasive, to an extent that even just walking outside the house, by the time you walk out and you come back in, chances are very high that you would have involved yourself in a transaction, in a process that is considered as being corrupt. But that on its own does not mean that corruption is the way to go, because the more that we continue to propagate corruption within the country, it means the country itself is losing revenue. It means that we are creating unnecessary loopholes in the system that we have to pay for us to get up the ladder. You simply have to start your enterprise, and according to the laws that are stipulated in the country, you run your enterprise. and you thrive on account of you being an ethical young person who's running a successful youthful enterprise. And then when you look at the previous Ukondla Ukurera Fund, when you try to look at how corruption happened within that particular fund, in most cases it was corruption on the other side of the coin, where it wasn't these young people choosing to be corrupt because our leaders are corrupt, but in essence a community could have been targeted to receive an X amount of money, and then they receive less that particular amount, and because it's an opportunity which they cannot let go, they are forced to work with whatever comes through the facility and the fund. And for most of them, it then affected the viability of their enterprises, because then if they wanted to buy a big water pump to pump water from a nearby lake or water source to irrigate and to water their piece of land, whether it's for the production of potatoes or beans or whatever, it would mean that simply because they got a smaller pump, already the output of water is going to be low, they're also going to be adversely affected. And in some of the sites would actually get there, and you'd find that the yields are actually beginning to fail on account of them having a poor pump, simply because when the resources came, they actually ordered a bigger pump, but the people that would then deliver a very small pump, and then they are forced to do with that. And for most of them, they would allege corruption either on the part of the different political leaders within that particular community, or in how the Zimbabwe Youth Council itself would then handle the disbursement of some of these materials that are meant to go and support the enterprises of these young people. So I think corruption is not the way to go. We need to fight it out of Zimbabwe, because the moment we continue to have it, even the poverty that we're talking about today, it will only continue to grow and manifest in different and much uglier forms and manifestations, which will actually become very difficult for us to fight in the near future.
And I also picked up the issue of speaking up. The youths were very quiet, and because they kept quiet, their circumstances didn't change for the better. You were supposed to receive X amount of money, you received less, because of your circumstances, you keep quiet, and still you're unable to go up the ladder. So I think it's very important for the youth to be able to speak up when things go wrong. Is there a conducive environment for the youths to thrive in Zimbabwe?
I think the environment in Zimbabwe, it's very tricky. I mean, it's very difficult for young people to thrive in Zimbabwe. I remember a few years back we did a national study that was trying to look at the lives of young people across 6 different thematic areas. And as part of that study, we actually discovered that young people in Zimbabwe, if you look at the Southern Africa region and beyond, economically, they live under the harshest conditions. For a young person to start a business, there is so much that is needed for them to, that is needed to be put in a young person to start his own business and enterprise. Earlier on, I mentioned the issue of, political disempowerment and discrimination and exclusion. When you look at the positions of power or where decisions are made, our young people are not there. The kind of policies that are coming in Zimbabwe are barely influenced by young people. If we try to look at the current 9th parliament, we only have 5 or less young people that are parliamentarians, and this is where legislation is made. If you try to look at the cabinet, the kind of crop of ministers that we have, how many of them are youthful? When government creates different platforms for young people to come in and give their inputs, is the government listening to what young people are saying? Recently, we just had the Minister for Youth coming out and sharing the principles for the Zimbabwe Youth Bill that is meant to repeal the Zimbabwe Youth Council Act. And if you look at those principles, they are quite heavy on seeking to economically empower young people or create opportunities for them to be empowered, which is something that is being borrowed from Section 20 of the Constitution, which talks about creating opportunities for young people in the economy, in education, and even including in issues of politics. So that on its own that recent move by government tells that in terms of policy, there has been a big gap in terms of an enabling environment that can actually drive the potential that is there in our young people. I mean, even earlier on you talked about speaking out. What happens when young people say that our salaries are not enough? What happens when our doctors speak out, when our nurses speak out, when students that are within tertiary institutions speak out? All that speaks to how deprived our environment is in terms of even the exercise of freedoms to association and assembly, which in a thriving and plural community are very, very important. If wages are low, the government should be able to sit with workers and improve the wages of people. But if the moment that people voice out, and that is being seen as if those people are driving an agenda that is contrary to that of the country, then it speaks volumes of the current environment that we have. And also talking about, even the environment in Zimbabwe, we have so many cases of different entrepreneurs that tried to start in Zimbabwe, that tried to thrive in Zimbabwe, but failed and struggled. And they actually export their enterprises into different countries in South Africa and beyond. And now they've become a marvel to those communities and countries because of how they've been able to create innovative solutions that are creating incomes, that are addressing issues around poverty in those countries and even here. But those people are Zimbabweans. How and when did we fail as a country to incubate and support their ideas? So that on its own speaks volumes of the kind of environment that we currently have in Zimbabwe.
That's a cause of concern, to say you are a young Zimbabwean, you want to start a business, but it's impossible in your own homeland, but you go and thrive next door. Yes. It speaks volumes to the kind of policies that we have in the operating environment. But let me come to you as an organization, as the National Association of Youth Organizations. How do you equip the youths to ensure that they are change makers, they are able to tackle poverty head on?
So specifically when it comes to issues of poverty reduction, in the work that we do, we strongly feel that if young people are involved in policy making processes, they can be in a position to shape the narrative that comes out at the end of the day. So we support young people, we create opportunities for them to interface with policymakers. One of the key instruments which the government uses in fighting poverty is the interim poverty reduction strategy papers, or loosely poverty reduction strategy papers. In the recent process that government undertook to come up with both of these, we supported young people across the 10 provinces to come out, speak to government officials in terms of in terms of the kind of strategies which they expect the country to adopt to drive poverty reduction. As an organization, illicit financial flows, corruption, we strongly organize young people to speak against those, to stand up against them, because in many ways they are also working to drive poverty within the country. Apart from that, we work with many young people that are driving different enterprises, or that are undertaking in different entrepreneurship initiatives where they are creating jobs at a local level. And given that we are a national association, we have presence not only within the country but even at the regional and global level. So what we also do is that we create linkages and connections for these young people to showcase their social innovations, their enterprises, in such a way that they can actually be considered and stand at some of these global platforms. And over the years, we have had quite a number of young people that have actually been able to progress from the Zimbabwean level to the African level, and at a global level they've actually come up with innovative solutions that are trying to create solutions for pressing people in rural areas who cannot access simple and basic services on account of the poverty that is currently prevailing within the country.
On that note, we have run out of time, but thank you very much, MacDonald, for coming to the program. I know you're very passionate about these issues. We'll ensure that we call you again and you come into the studio and we finish this conversation. So there you have it, listeners. We have come to the end of today's program, which was Gender and Youth Focus. And today we were concentrating on the issue of the youth and trying to analyze, McDonald helped us to understand whether the youth have a role to play in poverty reduction in Zimbabwe. And as he rightfully said, this phenomenon is multidimensional and requires all hands on deck for us to be able to tackle it. So until next week, my name is Lynette Manzini.